The opening chat, just so you know, says that thanks for joining. We will begin in about 30 minutes. I don't know if that might confuse people when they get in.
I'll change it right now. All right, can you hear me?
Go for it.
Okay. Hello, welcome to our webinar, which is to celebrate the World Day Against Human Trafficking. We are getting started right now. I wanted to just start with a couple housekeeping items. First off, we're going to hear some remarks that have been recorded by Representative Chris Smith, and then we're going to hear from Jessica Hart, the Director of the Office of Victims of Crime at the Department of Justice. Next, we will hear from Hillary Chester, the Associate Director for Anti-Trafficking Programs at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Migration and Refugee Services. Then we will hear from Jennifer Reyes-Lay, the Executive Director of the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. And lastly, we will hear from, second to last, we'll hear from Mary Silvestri, a founding member of the Esther Ministry at St. Joseph Catholic Church. And then we will hear from Ashley Feasley, the Policy Director for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Migration and Refugee Services. We have a pretty full agenda, but we have saved some time for question and answer. All participants will be muted while our speakers present and while we hear Representative Smith's remarks. But as always, you can type any questions or updates that you have into the chat box on the side. I see people are saying that I can't hear. If people can not hear, please send another message and we will work to fix the volume. But other than that, I think we should get started. One more thing, this is going to be recorded. It's going to be available on the Justice for Immigrants website on the Human Trafficking page, resource page. And additionally, there may be media on this webinar. If you have a question, please feel free to follow up with our Communications Director, Mark Priceman. It's M. Priceman, Priceman, @usccb.org. Okay, so I hear that we're good on the volume. I do want to get started. Again, we're welcoming you with some remarks made by Representative Smith, who, as many of you know, is a really devoted advocate on human trafficking. He was one of the original authors of the TVPRA. Chris Smith has been in Congress for over 30 years. He is a Republican from New Jersey. He is currently heavily involved in many different important Catholic causes, including the Human Trafficking Caucus and the Pro-Life Caucus. And so without ado, we're going to play the message and get started.
Hi. 20 years ago, the U.S. Congress approved and the President signed first ever historic legislation that I authored, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, a comprehensive whole-of-government initiative to combat sex and labor trafficking in the United States and around the world. The TVPA created a new, well-funded whole-of-government domestic and international strategy and established numerous new programs to protect victims, prosecute traffickers, and to the extent possible, prevent human trafficking in the first place, the 3 Ps. The TVPA included a number of sea change criminal code reforms, including treating as a victim and not a perpetrator of a crime anyone exploited by a commercial sex act who had not attained the age of 18, and where anyone older, where there was an element of force, fraud, or coercion. The TVPA radically reformed U.S. criminal code to authorize asset confiscation and jail sentences of up to life imprisonment for the traffickers. The TVPA also included victim sheltering and a national hotline. It created a new asylum category, the T-Visa, to protect trafficking victims and their families, and much more. Paradoxically, when I first introduced it, the legislation was met with a wall of skepticism and even opposition, dismissed by many as a solution in search of a problem. In 1999, for example, one high-ranking administration witness testified at one of my trafficking hearings against several provisions of the TVPA, including sanctions and the proposed annual trafficking in persons or TIP report and tier rankings, arguing that the TIP report and country rankings were unnecessary and could be counterproductive and make matters worse. Glad we rejected his advice. Today, the TIP report is the gold standard. Also, for many people in the 1990s, the term trafficking applied almost exclusively to drugs and weapons, not human beings. Reports of vulnerable persons, especially women and children, being reduced to commodities for sale, were often met with surprise, incredulity, or indifference. Thankfully, that has changed big time. It has changed because of you, your empathy for the victims, and indomitable resolve to hold perpetrators to account. That has and will continue to make the difference. You know, COVID-19 has made our anti-trafficking work much more challenging, especially as predators groom more children online. Traffickers and those they exploit become even more invisible, and jobs evaporate for rescued victims, making them more susceptible to being re-trafficked. More must be done to assist the weakest and most vulnerable. You bring our Lord's incredible message of unconditional love, hope, and reconciliation, and a peace that surpasses all understanding to victims who have suffered unspeakable abuse. Your mission is, in a word, irreplaceable.
Hi, this is Jessica Hart. Would you like me to get started?
Yeah, please, Jessica.
Yes, that sounds great. Okay. Well, thank you for having me here today. I am excited to be with everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear. I know a few people are having problems with their sound, but I'm excited to be here, and thank you very much to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops for putting together such an important event and inviting me to speak. Today is a day dedicated to comprehensive and coordinated approaches to preventing and combating human trafficking. And I think, as Congressman Bell said, this goal is really more essential now than ever, as trafficked individuals are facing barriers to identification and assistance right now.
Trafficked children have limited access to their friends and teachers and social workers and community organizations, and really have fewer places to turn for help. Additionally, the pandemic is stretching resources and presenting challenges for service providers, but I've also heard very innovative efforts that different people have used to provide those critical services. And it's very clear to me how resilient and hardworking and engaged this community is. And I think this conference today is really another example of that resiliency that I've witnessed. You all were able to pivot and virtually commemorate World Day Against Trafficking in person. So thank you to USCCB and everyone here today for pressing on and working hard to deliver vital services to victims during these challenging times. As you all know, human trafficking is a crime that cuts across all races, ethnicities, genders, and socioeconomic classes. Traffickers really prey on the vulnerabilities of their intended victims and deprive them of their human rights and dignities for purposes of their own profit. And I stand with you all today in condemning those that deny the sanctity of life. Combating trafficking is a top priority for this administration, for the Department of Justice, and for the Office for Victims of Crime. As the director of the Office for Victims of Crime, I've witnessed firsthand how resolutely our staff fulfills this mission of helping crime victims, especially during these difficult times. Our goal specifically for our anti-human trafficking efforts is to ensure that all trafficking victims are empowered on the road to justice. As the director, I'm proud to lead a dedicated and professional team that works every day to meet this goal. For those of you that don't know, the Office for Victims of Crime is the largest federal funder of combating domestic human trafficking. Our funding develops and strengthens programs for victims of human trafficking and those on the front lines of addressing this issue, including our brave law enforcement officers. Our funding supports direct services, collaborative task forces, stakeholder collaboration, and training and assistance, and other direct support of the field. Between July 2018 and June 2019, our human trafficking grantees, like USCCB, reported serving approximately 9,000 clients and training more than 80,000 service providers, law enforcement officers, and other community stakeholders across this country. In a single year, our task forces initiated more than 2,500 investigations nationwide. In 2019, the Department of Justice announced more than $100 million in funding through the Office of Justice programs to combat human trafficking. Attorney General Barr stated, these resources will help our law enforcement officers and victim service providers hold perpetrators accountable and give victims of these crimes a place to turn for refuge and support. This year, we plan to award another $100 million to go towards combating human trafficking. Specifically, this funding is going to go towards supporting transitional housing, which is the first time we've done this, serving youth and minor victims, providing advanced training for law enforcement, supporting task forces, and in response to the President's executive order on combating human trafficking and online exploitation, we have a new program that's really focused on prevention and identification. Trafficking is a constantly evolving crime, and I'm excited to be here today, and I can assure you that the Office for Victims of Crime will not rest in the fight to end human trafficking. So thank you to everyone for joining today and for your all commitment to that same fight. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Hillary Chester. I'm the Associate Director for Anti-Trafficking Programs at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops within the Office of Migration and Refugee Services. I'm excited that we have so many people registered and calling in today on this World Day Against Trafficking for our webinar, and I appreciate all the other speakers that have prepared remarks to share with you all. I just want to, if you'll go to my next slide, please, highlight some of the successes, really, and some of the developments that we've seen in the work of the Catholic Church, both in the U.S. and overseas over the last 20 years, since this is the 20th anniversary of the TVPA and the U.S. Government's response and funded services on human trafficking. And so one of the things that Congressman Smith as well as Director Hart mentioned were the task forces and the coalitions, and what a critical concept that has been to have these multidisciplinary teams come together in communities. And I don't know how many of you are aware, maybe many of you, but women religious were some of the very first people to really conceptualize this idea of a coalition, a multidisciplinary response to trafficking, recognizing that unlike a lot of other crimes, the hidden nature and the way that people are really manipulated and their trust and self-esteem is broken down so thoroughly that really there needs to be not only a law enforcement response to the crime, but also the social services, the legal services, and then very critically, those trusted relationships and people who are able to get into the communities most at risk, into the communities that are being impacted, like religious communities, religious congregations, people of faith, and then also the more restorative work that needs to be done supporting survivors in their personal work, journeying from victim to survivor and beyond. So I just wanted to highlight that the Catholic Church and women religious in particular were really at the sort of forefront of conceptualizing those kind of multidisciplinary task forces, and we've been making contributions as members of those task forces these last 20 plus years. I want to highlight one of our Department of Justice funded projects where we're providing employment services to survivors of trafficking. I think we also, over 20 years, have been able to move beyond the critical services of sustaining victims at the point that there's that intervention and they're out of the trafficking situation, and really thinking about what it takes to have survivors really move forward with their lives and just move beyond their victimhood in that period of exploitation and really develop into the whole person that they can be. And so we have a program providing employment services where that's all we focus on, is helping the individuals think about long-term plans for themselves to have rewarding, dignified work, become truly self-sufficient, and really build up their identity and contribute to the community. One of our clients is being highlighted this month in our Faces of Migration on the Justice for Immigrants webpage. So I'd encourage all of you to check that out, read her compelling story, and her hopeful attitude, I think, is really, a great reminder for all of us that do this work that there is another end, there is a light at the end of the tunnel for these survivors, and they move on and become really fantastic whole people once again. And then often, like she does, they have a sense of wanting to give back and help others. And so that generous spirit is really fantastic. Next slide, please. I also do just want to touch on how the church is responding to trafficking during this global pandemic. Again, Representative Smith mentioned this a bit. Certainly, we are seeing that as industries shut down around the world, that's displacing a lot of migrant workers or foreign workers. And then in the case of migrant and foreign workers whose status is tied to their employment, if they lose their jobs in many countries, including the U.S., but all around the world, very often then they lose their immigration status and become irregular or out of status. They may lose housing. In a lot of parts of the world, migrant workers are housed in big kind of work camps, and then when the work shuts down, so does their housing. And so the Caritas and other Catholic organizations around the world have been very responsive in trying to help stranded foreign workers, displaced foreign workers. And then certainly this, here in the U.S., we're seeing this new recognition of who is an essential worker, and really recognizing that everyone in our food chain, from the people in the fields and in the processing plants and meat packing and vegetable packing plants, to the people in restaurants and grocery stores, those are essential workers. And so we need to be, I think there's some opportunities to really look at working conditions for those folks in what we've now recognized to be truly critical work, and making sure that we're really valuing them as much as we should, and that their working conditions are safe and that they're not putting themselves at risk for the rest of us, and not making sacrifices that are beyond what anyone should be called to do. And I think there's some real opportunities for advocacy. And so I would just highlight for all of us to think about these gray areas and these sort of these issues of workers' rights and workers' conditions and vulnerabilities that lead people to be trafficking, and do what we can as a global church, and then certainly at the local level as local church.
Thank you so much. I'm Jennifer Reyes-Lay, the Executive Director of U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. And I want to just thank our hosts today, the USCCB and the Office of Migrant and Refugee Services, for inviting us to participate. We're a proud member of the Coalition of Catholic Organizations Against Human Trafficking, working closely with many of the other speakers who've been on the call today. So we're happy to be here. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. So Pope Francis has called human trafficking an open wound on the body of contemporary society, a scourge upon the body of Christ. It is a crime against humanity. What fuels us in our work to end human trafficking and to support survivors is our faith, and our faith in the inherent dignity of every human being, and the belief that Washington, D.C., who were already involved in different kinds of anti-trafficking efforts, to learn more, to engage with some elected officials, and to see how we might be able to work more closely together in order to end human trafficking. And so that really planted the seeds of what would grow into the network we have today of U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. In the first few years, there were just 3 sisters who led an initial steering committee to guide the work. In 2014, we were proud to join Talitha Kum, which is the international umbrella network of Catholic sisters all over the world who are working to end human trafficking. In 2016, we were officially registered as a 501c3 non-for-profit and continued to function with an all-volunteer board running the organization until 2019, when I was hired on as the first executive director and staff for the organization. Next slide. So today we've grown that network to include over 100 congregations of women religious throughout the country, and also partner coalitions, individual churches and parishes, and individuals are members of our network. So you don't have to be a Catholic sister to join. We believe that ending slavery is everyone's work, and so we really invite everyone to join us in this collaboration together. Next slide. The focus of our work covers 3 main areas. So we do education and prevention work, we do advocacy, and then we also offer direct support for survivors. And I'll explain a little bit more about each of those in the next few slides. Next So first, under the area of education and awareness, I'm so excited to announce that we have a beautiful brand new website. It's the same address. You can see it at the bottom of each of our slides, sistersagainsttrafficking.org, but it has a new layout. And so I encourage you to check it out. All of these resources are available on our website. So one of the projects of our education working group is to create modules, which are 2 to 4 pages, that include kind of a brief background overview of human trafficking connected to one particular topic, and then also have clearly connected to that topic and action items that are available as suggestions for how to get involved. We currently have 11 educational modules on different topics related to human trafficking, and we're working on creating additional ones. Everything that we currently have is also available in Spanish. Our organization is also available if you'd like to have someone come and give you a presentation, an overview of human trafficking. With things as they are right now with limited in-person events, we're happy to join like a Zoom or a Skype meeting, whatever platform you're using to share about our work and kind of the reality of human trafficking right now. We also put out a monthly Stop Trafficking newsletter, which focuses on a different topic each month, again related to human trafficking, and provides education, informational resources, articles on that topic that have come out recently, along with action items as well. And finally, on our website, you'll notice we do have a blog. We try and share both national and international news related to the reality of human trafficking. And then we also curate our own content with monthly member reflections and other articles about the work of Catholic sisters working to end human trafficking. Next slide. In our advocacy work, I encourage you to check out the advocacy page of our website. I just got a lot of feedback, so I'm wondering if one of the other speakers maybe is off mute. Okay, I'm going to try and keep going. Hopefully you all can still hear me. So related to our advocacy campaigns, I encourage you to check out our current campaigns page. One thing that we're focused on is the increase of children exposed to online trafficking, especially as they increase their screen time in the current pandemic. And so we have a letter to Attorney General Barr to focus on enforcing and fully funding the Protect Our Children Act from 2008, which works to help protect children from online exploitation. In the past, we've run advocacy campaigns that have focused on the supply chain. Many of you probably participated in our Labeling for Lent campaign that we ran in collaboration with the Coalition of Catholic Organizations Against Human Trafficking. We've also done advocacy days focused on immigration policy, on refugees, looking at vulnerable populations to human trafficking and how we can better support them so that they aren't taken advantage of by human traffickers. Next slide. We also, many of our members also work to provide direct services to survivors. So members are connected to about a half dozen houses and shelters across the country that offer services for survivors as they're immediately transitioning out of situations of trafficking. A lot of the support in-house can look like counseling and therapy, spiritual support, job training, additional education support. And so to that end, we also work to raise money to provide educational scholarships for survivors to pursue their educational goals. And we're working to try and connect with employers who are interested in hiring on survivors so that they can build up job skills in the areas of their interest. I would encourage if anyone's on this call who's either interested in partnering with us on educational scholarships or on job placement and training to follow up with me. My email address is just jennifer@sistersagainsttrafficking.org, and I'd be happy to speak with you about how you can partner with us to support survivors. We're also working on developing a mentorship program, and this is particularly focused on after survivors transition out of the initial safe house and are living independently, how can we continue to provide a supportive relationship for them as they pursue their goals and their dreams? And this is the mentorship program. And so we're working on developing this and testing it out in a couple of our houses right now. But it could be another opportunity in the future to plug in if you'd be interested in supporting as a mentor for a survivor. Next slide. Okay, and so finally, the question is always, what can I do? How can I get involved? So a few suggestions we have is certainly we would love to have you become a member of our network. We're stronger working together when we can share resources and collaborate. You're also encouraged to participate in any of our current campaigns related to advocacy. Currently, we have active the sign-on letter to Attorney General Barr. Labeling for Lent is still active because we are still in conversation with Cisco, especially during the pandemic, about protecting seafood workers, and so you can still sign on to that. And we also have an active campaign related to COVID funding, working to stabilize vulnerable refugee populations as part of the next funding package. I certainly encourage you to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and you can like and retweet, forward the messages we're putting out there to help raise awareness about the work to end human trafficking. Also, as you learn, educate others in your ministry settings. Share what you're learning about, share what you're hearing or what you're curious about. Make sure others know that this is happening in every single one of our communities. And so it's something that impacts us all, whether we realize it or not. Related to labor trafficking, the choices that we make as consumers is huge. And so becoming a conscious consumer and investigating what are the labor practices of those, the companies that we are purchasing from can play a big role in helping to eliminate labor trafficking in the supply chain. And finally, we ask for your prayers. We really believe in the power of prayer and ask you to continue to pray for us and for all of those work in this work to end human trafficking. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm Mary Ann Silvestri. I'm one of the founding members of Esther Ministry at St. Joseph Parish in Long Beach, California. I'm very happy to be here today, and I want to thank USCCB for inviting us to participate. And I'm very happy to be representing our parish in the Los Angeles Archdiocese. Next slide, please. We were inspired by Queen Esther, a brave woman who delivered the Jews from the wicked Haman by never losing hope that God would save his people. With that inspiration, we took Esther as our namesake and our acronym: End Slavery, Trafficking Humans, and Effect Rescue. In our work, we share Esther's hope and faith in God, and we continue to work with her blessing. Next slide, please. Next slide. Everyone is outraged about human trafficking, but the issue can be overwhelming and scary. You want to help, but you don't know what you can do. That's how Esther was formed. In 2014, a few members of our parish attended an open meeting of the Long Beach Human Trafficking Task Force. We wanted to educate ourselves about human trafficking, the organizations and resources in our area, what they were already doing, and how we could help. We definitely saw a need, but we had to assess our own skills and resources. We had to be strategic and realistic about what we could do. We knew we could do three things. We could raise awareness, volunteers, and donations. And we could use these donations for humanitarian aid to human trafficking survivors and those at risk. So with our mission, we approached our pastor, who wholeheartedly gave us approval to form a ministry, and Esther is now a core team member of the task force. As such, Esther has collaborated with the task force members to provide assistance to frontline organizations like Homeland Security, the Department of Children and Family Services, CAST, and other survivor outreach organizations and shelters. Next slide. It's been quite a journey, but it all began at the parish level. Esther began to raise awareness in our parish by providing human trafficking facts and events in our parish bulletin and on social media. We developed a logo, a bookmark, which as you can see is on the slide, and a link on the parish website. And through this link, we were able to keep the parishioners informed about what we were doing. And we also established a direct email. That way people could reach out to us and get additional information. We could answer questions. When we needed volunteers, they knew where they could reach. You know, in pre-COVID time, when we were able to meet in person, we organized human trafficking speakers for mass and ministry meetings. We selected human trafficking books for our parish book club, like Half the Sky or Same Kind of Different as Me. We hosted fair trade coffee and donuts after Mass. And we hosted a Become a Shepherd event using the USBCB materials. And of course, we assembled humanitarian bags, those bags that include clothing and hygiene items. But to do this, we had to get together over 20 volunteers in assembly line fashion and fill the bags. Well, now in post-COVID times, a lot of these things are not possible anymore. But while things have changed, the needs didn't go away. So we had to adapt. Now we communicate via email, social media, Zoom meetings, in order to keep in contact with those frontline organizations to assess their current needs and to assure that we remain effective in helping those at risk. For example, one of the things that we've found out is that street outreach and shelters need PPE at this time. PPE being masks, hand sanitizers, and gloves. So now what we do is we order online in bulk both the humanitarian items and the PPE. Some of the websites that we use are dollardays.com or positivepromotions.com. And for the clothing items, we still go through online manufacturers or distributors like JCPenney and Walmart. We have found that it's been very helpful to order in bulk and have it delivered. We ship either directly to the outreach organization, so we don't have to have the human contact, or to a central distribution point for pickup. One of the members at Esther's has offered her garage as command central, so to speak, for delivery and pickup. So these are some of the ways we've had to change what we do. Next slide. On a community level, Esther has always helped organize and participate in the task force monthly meetings and community events. You know, I said we provide volunteers. Well, we do. We provided volunteers at the annual Youth Empowerment Safety Symposium. It's an awareness event in Long Beach attended by over 300 people. We staffed the Human Trafficking Awareness Table at the Long Beach Grand Prix, which gets hundreds of thousands of people into the city of Long Beach. And at events, we'll staff fair trade resource tables offering fair trade coffee and tea and information about Catholic relief services. But once again, post-COVID, we've had to change our ways, and we've had to go virtual. Now we attend Zoom planning meetings and network meetings, and we're even currently planning, 2021 as a virtual awareness event. We've participated in the task force public service announcement video to let the public know that we're still at work. But most importantly, we continue to dialogue with those frontline human trafficking organizations to assess and respond to the changing humanitarian needs. When we started our ministry, we had no idea where this journey would take us. All we knew was that we saw a need and we wanted to help. We also knew that the only way to make this happen was to keep showing up, stepping up, and following where the Spirit was leading. Our ministry has expanded beyond our expectations. We're part of something so much bigger than ourselves. We're part of the movement in the fight against human trafficking. I hope that our Esther experience has shown that we can all learn about human trafficking, be a voice, and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. I'm Ashley Beasley, and I'm going to finish with a little bit of what the current policy and advocacy is at the federal level around trafficking of persons. And then we're going to open it up for questions. I ask that you, if you have a question, and we've already received a couple, that you type it into the chat box, and our speakers will do the best they can to answer the questions. And so I'm going to just quickly go through two main areas on current human trafficking policy and advocacy. The first is relating to funding, which Director Hart spoke a little bit about, and then the second is legislation. So getting started, while there has been lots of fight about funding for other areas relating to serving vulnerable populations, such as immigrants and refugees and also the poor, there is unified bipartisan support when it comes to the issue of funding for human trafficking. And so Director Hart gave some good figures about enacted funding at the federal level that had occurred in 2019. And I'm going to talk about the most recent, what we've seen in this past week, past 2 weeks, relating to the House of Representatives for fiscal year 2021. It's important that we're focusing on this, even though it's not law, because it does give forecasting as to how lawmakers are going to look to address trafficking in light of COVID-19 budget constraints. So I've highlighted here 4 big departments with budgets that address human trafficking. And I want to start with what I think is the biggest one, which is the Department of Justice. The House bill, which is set to be passed here, either looked at and examined by the whole House tomorrow and likely be passed early next week, includes $95 million in trafficking assistance, $3 million specifically for the prevention of trafficking of girls, and $1.5 million for a national study of law enforcement response to sex trafficking of minors. These are all located in various offices of the Department of Justice. As I mentioned before, we will be sending out the slides, and I will be sending to our coalition and to anybody who is interested our more intensive appropriations kind of data sheets about this issue. And next is the Department of Health and Human Services. So the Department of Health and Human Services has traditionally been the department that has served foreign national and U.S. citizens within the United States from the point of their initial identification on their road to the full rehabilitation of human trafficking survivors. And this year, I think it's very important to know that the House of Representatives gave $29.95 million to victims of trafficking assistance on that programming. This is not what we had asked for. We asked for $40 million in this category, an equal split of $20 million for foreign national and $20 million for U.S. citizens. But it is notable that it is an increase of what was actually from last year, and many of the accounts serving vulnerable populations within the Department of Health and Human Services have not been up. The Department of State, I don't know why we're blank here, but the Department of State is where the JTIP, so the office that handles trafficking in persons internationally, and also who handles the TIP report, they also received in the State Department SFOPS, the State Department Foreign Operations Grant, of about $35 million, which was in line with kind of what we had asked for and a good number. I also want to pivot to the Department of Homeland Security. Now, many of you who may work in Washington may think of Homeland Security as only, strictly immigration or border enforcement or TSA at the airport. But the Department of Homeland Security has a very robust and increasingly large presence when it comes to identifying human trafficking in all of the forms of transport around the United States and externally on an international basis, and then also has an increasingly robust work against forced labor and goods made from forced labor. And the funding for this year actually rings true to that. The Blue Campaign, which is the Department of Homeland Security's office to identify human trafficking and do training, received $1 million over what they had requested at $2.16 million. And this is a big deal because only about 2 years ago was the Blue Campaign actually written into law. They had been an administrative program, and now they are legitimately with congressional authorization and appropriations. And then significantly, $8.05 million has been set aside for trade agreement remedies and enforcement related specifically to products made with forced labor. Some of you may not know this, but the Department of Homeland Security has a robust forced labor prevention program that focuses on working with foreign national victims and looking at businesses, but also, very importantly, the customs aspect of the Department of Homeland Security is looking at items that are made with forced labor and trying to make sure that they are not put on our market, identified, and certainly removed from the supply chain. So those are the appropriations or the funding that we're seeing, and the forecast leads to, like I said, in the space of budget shortfalls with other areas due to COVID-19, it really shows that we will continue to see at least modest, and in some cases, like the Department of Justice, real growth to the commitment of trafficking funding at the federal level. I want to quickly pivot into looking just at some upcoming and current legislation that we are working on, and we are hopeful to engage with you as well. One is the LIFT Act. It's known as Leveraging Information on Foreign Traffickers. This is a bill that has a number of provisions, but the provisions that I think we at the USCCB are most concerned about is the authorization of the Survivors Council and making sure that all survivors who participate receive funding. There is an independent House bill. It's H.R. 5664. The Senate bill is likely to be introduced in the coming weeks. One of the reasons why there's not a Senate bill is because they are trying to get this language into the National Defense Authorization Act, and so they're kind of waiting to see. The next is a bill that's been led by Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal, the Earn It Act, Eliminating Abusive and Rampant Neglect of Interactive Technologies Act. This is a bill that we are in the process of reviewing. It's got a lot of bipartisan support, and it does really move forward on SESTA FOSTA, for those of you who are familiar with that legislative effort last session. And so it looks to do many important things, such as creating a commission to review, online, pornographic and also child sexual exploitative materials with a very diverse coalition, as well as put increased penalties for online service providers. The last one I put in is something that was introduced last week by Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. It's known as the Slave-Free Business Certification Act. And this is something that we are learning more about. We think it's an important step to see, new stakeholders in the Senate particularly introduce supply chain transparency legislation, as we have long supported it. So we are in discussions with the office, and I'm hopeful that you will follow up with us as we learn more about this bill and what we can do if it aligns with our principles to be supportive. So at this point in time, we're at the end of our speaker presentation, and we've got about 10, 12 minutes for Q&A. And I see, as I've been speaking, there's been a couple questions. So I would ask for Hillary, who seems to have answered a couple, if she could put herself off mute and answer a few of these questions and read them out loud for the group.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello? Okay, good. Sure. So I saw one question about, and I don't know if Director Hart is still in the call, but I saw a question about the Office for Victims of Crimes grant program. And the Department of Justice, and I can send the link, has several different kinds of grant announcement pages on their website. They have both a list of all of the grantees, including a list of all of the trafficking-related program grantees. And so you can see who has grants for legal services or shelter services or other comprehensive case management services for victims and survivors, as well as some of their outreach and training grants. And then there's also a place where you'll be able to see open grant opportunities, so open solicitations for proposals. And so we've already seen, and full disclosure, we applied for a couple of grants for the 2021 fiscal year. So they certainly do have the intention of supporting programming to support victims and survivors, as well as support law enforcement and other actors in different roles fighting trafficking. So for sure there is funding for 2021. And there may be some open solicitations now. And then what they've done in the past is when towards the end of the current fiscal year, if they have extra funding, they sometimes come up with special initiatives to meet gaps that they're aware of, and will have some special funding with that kind of quote-unquote leftover money to meet specialized needs. Let's see. Are there any other questions? I think I shared some links for Catholic Health Association, which does a lot of work. They have a working group that their members can join focused on human trafficking, and they do trainings, and they have all kinds of resources so that medical and healthcare workers who are interested as frontline folks to be more educated on how to respond, how to identify trafficking victims, how to treat survivors. So that's a resource. And then similarly, the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Trafficking in Person, which is very focused on trafficking in the U.S., separate from Department of State's overseas trafficking work. But HHS does domestic work on trafficking, and they have what's called the SOAR, and I don't know what that stands for off the top of my head, but they do have training and educational resources specifically also for medical settings, medical healthcare practitioners and settings. And they have a National Training and Technical Assistance Center that can do training, so you can contact them. I don't know what their capacity is, and certainly in the COVID times they may be able to do more because it would all be remote. But definitely worth checking out if you are in the health field and are interested in getting more resources and maybe even some training.
Thanks, Hillary. So this is Ashley. I have one more question just for our audience because they were interested. I'd love for you to describe the Catholic Coalition of Organizations Against Human Trafficking and how people can learn more and sign up. And then we'd like to give Jennifer the opportunity to speak about how we can move forward signing up with the U.S. Sisters Against Human Trafficking, as I think that there's a lot of interest in both of those.
Sure. So the Coalition of Catholic Organizations Against Human Trafficking is national. We host it, so we do a lot of the logistics and the website and hosting meetings and calls. But it's a member organization, and members can be any Catholic. We're a little more open as well to other faith communities. We just talked about that the other day. But the idea is that we come together and share best practices, share trends, share what we're seeing at the local level. And then we also come together and have coalition-wide initiatives. And for the last 5 or 6 years now, we've been very focused on a consumer campaign to look at and try and address trafficking in the fishing industries in particular. And how can we as a consumer country, and then individual consumers, how can we pressure different levels of corporate interests and businesses in the supply chain to do a better job of cleaning up that sector in particular. So we do that. We also, some of our members host education and outreach and advocacy events, and then to the degree that all of us other members can support those, we do. So we've done shared and joint briefings to legislators here in Washington, D.C., and we also generally do a big event for the World Day of Prayer Against Human Trafficking that Pope Francis designated a particular day of prayer for us Catholics worldwide. And so we always do an event on that day. Sometimes it's a mass, sometimes it's a prayer service. So if you're interested in joining us, again, we do shared events, we do shared advocacy, but we also just share with each other what we're learning, what we're seeing, and support each other in all of our different efforts and initiatives at the local level.
And this is Jennifer again. I appreciate everyone's interest. I would encourage you to visit our website. We have a whole page about membership that explains expectations of members, benefits of membership, and then also different membership levels. So there's different annual fees if you're an individual versus if you're like a church or a congregation of religious. And you can also feel free to reach out to me directly. I'd be more than happy to speak with anyone interested in learning more about our organization.
All right, so I think that we are nearing the end of our time, and I don't see any other questions right at this second. I don't think I'm missing something. But you know, we welcome further discussion as things move forward. We're so thankful that you joined us to be, you know, honoring the day. And we're hopeful that you consider joining the coalition as well as the U.S. Sisters in our and their and together combined efforts to move this issue forward. We will be putting forward more resources and materials, and we look forward to engaging. One last item, just as a housekeeping item, as I mentioned, this will be recorded. Hopefully you signed up. When you signed up, you gave your email. We will also include it in the trafficking newsletter that Hillary and her team put out. And please visit www.justiceforimmigrants.org. We cover a number of issues, and human trafficking is one of them. The resources will be there as well. One thing that we would love to hear is if you have ideas for other webinars, including speakers. We would love to hear them. This is a first run of doing this type of work, so thank you for your patience, but we want to be interactive with you and have you as well participate and lead discussions with us as a group, because together we can do this in a much better way, and it takes all hands on deck. So thank you again, and we really appreciate your time, and have a great day.